Good morning, everybody. Welcome online. Welcome to our exciting Civil Coffee Clutch Learning Network. It's an amazing experience to be your host. This is our first one of 2026, so all of the best for this beautiful year that we've started. I hope it started with a bang and things will go from where you started to better, to better, to best. I want to welcome our speaker online this morning. I'm not going to have a long introduction like I normally do. Dr. Kiro Pillay from the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. I'm just going to give you a bit of highlights from his resume. He's got 35 years experience in the IT sector as practitioner, academic, researcher, and public sector. He's currently with the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, where he hosts or he manages the Cybersecurity Hub mandate and the National Computer Security Incident Response Team. He's currently the chair of the SADC Regional CERT, country delegate to BRICS and the United Nations Open-Ended Work Group on Cybersecurity and the Ad Hoc Committee on Cybercrime. He's a member of the Network of Experts for In-Depth Engagement with the United Nations Secretary General High-Level Advisory Body on Artificial Intelligence. He's a visiting academic at the School of Management, IT and Public Governance in University of KZN, Wits Business School, postgraduate supervision, research, curriculum development and teaching. Dr. Pillay, it's an amazing privilege for me to have you online this morning. For those of you who do not know him, I hope that you get to know him now, and he's an amazing teacher. So thank you very much. I'm handing over to you.
Thanks, David. Good morning, everybody. I think you may have oversold me a little bit, but I'm going to try and meet your standards. So good morning, everybody. Yeah. So as David said, I'm from the Department of Communication and Digital Technologies. I manage the National Cybersecurity Mandate. So when David asked me to just chat to everybody, I had a specific set of questions that he outlined. So I'm going to stick to that quite closely. It's about 10 questions, and I've prepared some slides around that. I think the format's going to be more around the questions towards the end. So I'll try and get through them as quickly as possible. I do have a hard stop at 9:45, unfortunately, because I'm chairing the workshop for the National Cybersecurity Strategy, and it's a 10-minute drive from here. So I'll try and get through my slides fairly quickly. I generally talk fairly fast, so just hold on to your seats and let me get through it, and then we can take some questions. So I mean, the job of a CISO at the best of times is a thankless task, right? But I think in terms of local government, provincial government, even national government, the role of a CISO is much more demanding, right? There are things that we need to do that are outside the realms of other CISOs in the private sector. So I think the first question that was posed is, where do ICT managers start, right? And my question, I would probably pose, is cybersecurity fundamentally an economic discipline rather than a technical one? And it may sound like a strange question because, the very concept of cybersecurity is a guy with a hoodie and a screen full of zeros and ones and all of these technical solutions that we need to implement and technical issues ranging from hashing algorithms, IP addresses and encryption. But fundamentally, I think cybersecurity is a social technical kind of issue, right? It's a lot to do with human interaction. There's a large element of it that's technical. And I think it is a risk-based discipline. So it falls within that category of risk. For me, managed cybersecurity is a risk issue. And while technical controls are necessary, they are not necessarily sufficient. They need to be contextualized within a certain kind of framework where we understand how and when to use technology. So strategically, so strategy is fundamentally an economic issue. Whenever you're writing a strategy, it's around allocation of scarce resources to reduce loss under uncertainty, right? That's generally and specifically in the cybersecurity domain. So, excuse me. So let me move on. So where do you start then? So for me, I think you start with the idea of understanding risk. You start with the idea of understanding your mandate and who you're accountable to. So if you're in the private sector, the role of a CISO is very much around protecting the organization's profit and loss and those kinds of things, right? I think in government, and I'm happy for you guys for us to chat about this later, but I think in government, we need to shift our mindset to say, cybersecurity is a risk and governance discipline, but it must align with service delivery. We're not really worried about profit and loss. We're worried about service delivery. We're worried about public trust. We're worried about legal compliance. And legal compliance is not only, kind of appeasing the AG and meeting those compliance requirements. There's an emerging legislative framework, and there's some ethical issues that may not be captured in any legislation or framework that we also need to think about. We are dealing with citizens, we are dealing with citizens' privacy and data and all those kinds of things. So practical starting points, I think, as a CISO, I think one of the things, one of the things we do at the Cybersecurity Hub at the department is we created a 2-day masterclass. It's an accredited program through our digital skills entity called NAMISA. It's a 2-day masterclass where we go out to the municipalities and we kind of run this 2-day masterclass for those. And we've made it very practical and we've created a template. So it's a working document. So people come out with some kind of working document. But one of the things that emerges from all of those teachings is that we often don't understand our mandate, right? So in terms of what services must never stop. So our mandate is not around, ostensibly it's about protecting the organization, but essentially it's around what services must never stop. So our water and building and electricity and our SESA grant payment systems and all those kinds of things, those are the services that must never stop. And what we must do is we must start mapping those critical assets, right? We must understand exactly what our surface area is, our surface is, because it can be very broad, right? The threat surface is slightly broader than in a normal environment. We have IoT and operational technology and smart meters. And we must, within that context, we must identify our crown jewels. And all organizations need to identify the crown jewel. But in our case, it is what would cause a public crisis of compromise. And it may be different from the crown jewels in a mining industry where the systems are, different and their crown jewels will be different. But for us, the question we ask, our crown jewels relate to what would cause a public crisis if compromised, right? We need to assess current maturity, and this is just a practical starting point, right? Now, there's some slides at the end that hopefully can bring it all together. We need to assess our current maturity, kind of figure out where we are, do a gap analysis. There are frameworks that assist. The NIST, I think, is a very good framework. There's over 100 constructs there that we can cherry pick how we start looking at maturity. The idea is always some kind of maturity model, some kind of evolution, right? But we need to look at policies. Policies are not a tick box exercise. They are instruments to for behavior change, right? So they are important. They are important artifact that we need to take more kind of control over. We need to look at incident response. There's only two types of organizations, right? Those that have been attacked and those that are still to be attacked or haven't been attacked yet. So incident response is a capability that we need to build in. We need to start looking at backups and just immutable backups and offsite backups and the ability to test whether those backups are working and some access control. We need to establish a governance structure, who reports to whom, who owns cyber risks, because I know in municipalities from our teachings is that it's often lumped under IT, it's lumped with the guy who has done a little bit of studies around cybersecurity, it's kind of just appropriated without due diligence, without the proper resources. It's almost an afterthought, like the way IT used to be about 30 years ago, right? And since then, IT has evolved from being an enabler to a strategic part of the organization, and cybersecurity needs to move in that kind of framework and in that kind of evolution as well. We need to adopt a framework. I think frameworks are important. Frameworks give us some kind of benchmark. It gives us a sense of what we need to do. We don't need to follow them slavishly, but I think they're an important tool for moving forward. And you can use the NIST or the ISO 27001 or the whole 27000 series, right? As a CISO, and we may need to be, we may be technically very proficient, but we need to move away from um, talking in tech kind of language to the language of business, right? So move away from firewalls and patches to service delivery continuity. So that's how we kind of get our ideas across to our executive. Financial impact of cyber incidents, well, I'm not going to run quickly through these, with some direct costs and some indirect costs, but the indirect costs are probably harder to quantify, right? Direct costs are probably slightly easier. We can guess how much the forensics is going to cost, and DFIR stuff, digital forensics and incident response. So we can have a reasonable estimate of those. But the indirect costs, the reputational damage, civil litigation, loss of public trust, those things aren't quantifiable in the normal sense. The second question was posed around vanilla cybersecurity strategy versus a municipal specific cyber risk strategy. And I think a vanilla for me is a standard approach focusing on protecting corporate assets, whereas municipalities, we face a unique high-risk landscape, right? Characterized by limited resources, often outdated infrastructure, and the responsibility for critical public facing and services, right? So I think that is an additional pressure that we don't face in the private sector. Specifically, we're looking at very complex infrastructure. Like I said earlier, we're talking about IT, IoT, devices across multiple locations. We're looking at resource constraints. And I know that the resource skills gap in cybersecurity is endemic, it's global, but I think in the private and in the public sector, it is particularly kind of egregious. It's quite in big, especially in South Africa, right? We're a high value target. We store massive amounts of personal identifiable information. We store very sensitive information, right? Attacks can halt operations, affecting public safety, essential services, and outdated systems. We've been through that. So municipalities, so we need to be proactive. And we need to talk about this thing called defense in depth, and I think I'll speak about it later, which is an approach focusing on layers of defense, right? We need to think about things like cyber hygiene and cyber resilience, and very, very mundane things that we need to be doing well, like patching, multi-factor authentication, employer training. Employees and insider threats and negligence and those kinds of things still remain one of the majority of the weaknesses, right? We need to look at various risks. A lot of stuff in municipalities we've outsourced, right? We have these strong supply chains, so we rely often on third-party services. So we need to understand our role in making that supply chain kind of more secure, and how we can bring to bear some kind of influence. And we need to build resilience. That's what we'll cover more. I picked up from the Reserve Bank directive from 2024, and it talks about some of the things that we're talking about here. So, and it's a directive directly from the Reserve Bank for municipalities, and it talks about the idea of policies and strategy, talks about cyber resilience frameworks, when we have to review. Sorry, my office is next to the cow train, so it's a little bit of noise as the train goes by. So we talk about annual reviews of policies and strategies and those kinds of things. You can have a look at that. On the right-hand side is from the AG's report from 2014, and it talks about whether we can be innovative, visionary, innovative, whether we are proactive or whether we're reactive. And without naming and shaming, but there's a couple of you can read that at your leisure, but it actually ranks metros according to that kind of Maslow hierarchy. Cyber risk ownership levels, right? So risk, this is the potential that some damage occurs to some asset, right? But in municipalities, it becomes a risk to service delivery, right? governance, integrity, and those kinds of things. And a little picture on your right, it's just a map of how we understand this interaction between vulnerability, threat actors, assets, and risk. At the bottom is also from the AG's report, AG's website, and it talks about whether metros have been looking at the issues of risk management, and we can see that City of Cape Town, we got a 3 rating, and you can see the rest, right? What's important in this kind of environment, this complex environment that we are operating on, is that risk is a shared responsibility, right? It doesn't sit with one particular person. It doesn't just sit with the department. It sits across multiple kind of structures and institutions almost, right? So it's a shared responsibility. At the council level, people are concerned about reputation, public trust, service delivery collapse. At the municipal managing accounting officer, the equivalent of a DG in the department, we're looking at ultimate accountability. We're looking at PFMA, MFMA implications. These are the people that sign off on the risk posture. At the CIO, the ICT manager, CISO, they are responsible for control implementation. So what kind of business cases do we build? What kind of tools do we implement? Those are our controls, right? And they advise on risk exposure. At the business units own operational risk, okay? And the auditors, obviously, they evaluate governance and control adequacy, but they're not essentially responsible for managing risk. This is just another picture. At a strategic level, we're looking at reputation, service delivery. At a tactical level, we're looking at policy enforcement, budgeting, those kinds of things. And at an operational level, we're looking at more kind of operational things as the name implies, but looking at, patch Tuesday, patch Thursday, whatever people call it, monitoring and incident response. Okay. So what does sufficient cybersecurity look like? So sufficient does not mean an absence of incidents. Rather, it means resilience, right? And resilience is this ability to recover from an attack, to get back to providing services with the minimum disruption. Okay, and in our instance as public servants, we're talking about the ability to provide services, right? Ensuring systems can fail safely. I mean, that sounds like a misnomer. That things like backups work, that recovery is tested, right? In terms of trust, we need our residents and to feel safe using payment portals, to trust digital services, and for our suppliers to trust our procurement platforms. In terms of compliance, there's an emerging regulatory framework from actual legislation, right? AG kind of requirements. We've got the Cyber Crimes Act, we've got POPIA, we've got MFMA, and all of them have obligations that are placed upon us, everything from reporting incidents to the preservation of evidence. So there's a lot more we need to do in terms of that. In terms of continuity, BCP and DRP and those kinds of things. But we also need to have response plans. So the King 5, which came out the end of last year, it's starting to, integrate more of the governance issues into King 5. You can see the differences between King 4 and King 5. And while it may not place any obligations on organizations, it's a good kind of yardstick for a lot of the things we talk about, right? So what are the principles that drive the cybersecurity practice? So we talk about taking a risk-based approach to cybersecurity, to understanding that risk and cybersecurity are one and the same. We talk about things like defense in depth, multiple layers of security. We talk about things like leak privilege, right, and role-based access control. We talk about zero trust, which is a modern cybersecurity framework founded on the principle of never trust, always verify. Things like micro-segmentation, and those kinds of things, right? It's very much a policy-driven process. So it's something that, we can really think about. We talk about proportionality, resilience over perfection, and continuous improvement, right? A strategy and an implementation plan is by no means the be all and the end all. It's a maturity model, and that's something that we need to kind of instill in the way we approach this, this fairly onerous task that we have as government citizens. The minimum controls municipalities should consider. We need to understand that cybersecurity is a process, not a project. So governance is important. It starts from governance, understanding the policy, who owns risk, if cyber is in a risk register, Who do we report into? Are we reporting at an executive level? Do we report into the IT who reports for us? So those governance issues are important. In our masterclass, we have a standard organogram, which we kind of provide. What is more than organograms about roles and responsibilities. I've covered some of the technical issues. On the operational side, we really need to think about DFR stuff, right? Digital forensics and incident response. Things that we need when we start reviewing these things, vendor risk assessment we need to think about. In terms of monitoring, I know often municipalities don't have the resources, to start ingesting logs on on-prem. So we often have an outsourced stock model. So we think, an outsourced stock models bring with their own complications, the contractual obligations, the SLAs, penalty clauses. Those kinds of things need a legal lens, which we need to look at. We need to look at vulnerability management, log monitoring and those kind of things, right? Engagement with national structures. I slipped that in because I think it's important to understand what national structures there are. And these are the two main national structures that are mandated by the National Cybersecurity Policy Framework. On the left, you see the ECSC cert, which falls under the State Security Agency. So they are responsible for the public sector. They do lots of stuff around vulnerability management, cyber resilience, and they also assist when a threat has been experienced and when an attack is taking place. So they are your first port of call as a public sector. Number 3 is a cybersecurity hub. We're responsible for the private sector. That's the one that sits under the DCDT and the one that I work at. Responsible for the private sector, so banking, logistics, transport, health. Those are the people that we deal with. So we work very closely with state security, and we also do some of the stuff, like I said, some of the master classes and things like that. So those are your national structures. I mean, they're available. They can be called upon when needed. CETA is also in the mix there. That CETA has a stock that they're rolling out, and many of us get our services from CETA. So that's also some organization that we need to think about. In terms of people and organizational culture, right? And I've mentioned this before, the human firewall is often the weakest link, not only in South African local municipalities across the world. And culture is a construct of leadership. It's only leaders that can instill culture, right? Culture doesn't kind of begin in an organization from the ground up. Culture is leadership led, right? And if an executive ignores security protocols, staff will as well. So we need to see our execs kind of, having this culture of security and not using public Wi-Fi and VPNs, whatever it is, makes good culture for your particular organization. We need to instill things like no blame reporting, right? Clear separation of duties. We need to have cyber awareness embedded within from the start of a new employee, from induction. We need to have executive briefings, regular phishing simulations, social engineering awareness, and just some stuff that I found around that, right? How is strategy implemented, right? So we're moving on quite quickly. I think the questions and the discussions are probably more important. So how is cybersecurity strategy implemented, right? It requires a governance structure. It needs some kind of budget allocation. It needs skills development. And then we need to understand that this is a phased roadmap. So, the traditional level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is a good way to start in terms of measuring the roadmap. It needs metrics and KPIs and ability to report into council. Implementation models, we need to assess, prioritize, implement, monitor, and improve, right? Assessment, like I said, a NIST or a CSI controls or COBIT or ITIL, a framework that can be used. And some of the pitfalls that we found and comes from the literature is executive ownership, treating cyber as an IT issue only, over investing in tools and under investing in people. There's a model. There is I teach a class, and last night's class was around this model, this mathematical model that says we shouldn't be spending more than 37% of an expected loss. So if a loss is going to be 500,000 rand, Any kind of control that costs more than 37% is then diminishing returns. That is called a Gordon-Low model. And it's a mathematical model in the cybersecurity domain that people use in order to build these kinds of use cases. Ignoring legacy systems and focusing too much on kind of emerging AI and emerging technologies. No incident simulation. A strategy does not link to a risk register. Copy and paste strategies from other municipalities. I'm talking about compliance theater. I'm talking about things like heat maps where we kind of show our board that, listen, here's a heat map of likelihood and impact, but we kind of, okay, it's just a red, amber, green kind of thing. Those things are great. You don't quantify risk and you don't quantify loss. But we should be careful about how we use those kinds of heat maps. No funding alignment, no measurement of maturity, and of course, shadow IT, right? Organizations and this includes things like BYOD and those kinds of things. 10 questions I think we need to ask just in part of our assessment. Do we have tested backups? When was the last disaster recovery test? Did MFA enable for privileged accounts? Who owns cyber risk formally, right? Is cyber on the risk register? So these are the questions I think that go hand in hand with an initial gap analysis. And just, in summary, I'm kind of saying that cybersecurity is now a fiduciary responsibility, right? Under the MFMA, failure to manage risk is a governance failure. It is a service delivery risk. So no billing is equal to no revenue, no service delivery. And the question is not if you will be attacked, but when, right? So resilience becomes a real KPI, not prevention, resilience. And cybersecurity maturity, I think, is a mark of good maturity. So I know my brief has been to go through this 10 questions. I know it's fairly quick, but I think I'm speaking to a fairly mature audience. And I think the value comes from the kind of discussions and the questions that we can have now. Thanks, David.
Thank you very much for the presentation. You spoke very closely to the hearts of local government employees and people that understand the situation in local government. It's like you've been around for a while. I can see that. Before we open the floor for questions, I want to ask you one question. What is the impact on auditors in the internal audit and risk management? What should they be aware of? What should they look out for?
For internal audit or AG kind of compliance?
Internal audit specifically. There's a bit of a shortage of skills in internal audit when it comes to IT governance.
Yeah. No, I know that. So, I mean, I'm going to give you some anecdotal stuff, right? So, I think, so right here at the department, I've been here for 10 years and I've been managing the cybersecurity kind of the hub, right? The national CISA. And it has a lot of risk attached to it in terms of what's emerging and that kind of thing. But I think the domain is so complex, David, and the level of sophistication of threat actors, the complexity of the attacks and the threats that we face. I think for internal audit and risk management people to understand that is a message that we need to get across in business language rather than kind of technical language. And I think it's important we start trying to do that to assist them to understand what we need to deal with so that the risk then is captured correctly. Okay. Capturing the risk incorrectly leads to them identifying controls which seem to be on the face of it what is captured within the risk. But those things aren't practical. There's not real world kind of understanding of what we deal with. So I think that's the main thing for me that I've kind of experienced. And it's more exacerbated in the public sector, right? I think in the private sector, I think there's a higher level of maturity. Mostly they have more money to throw at things, right? Especially in the finance sector, right? They have more money to throw at resources. So I think that's the kind of situation we are faced with. So I think it's probably my answer. I'm sure guys have a much more articulate around this than me.
Thank you very much. I think you touched on it exactly right. And one of the aspects that you spoke about that absolutely caught my attention, and we all know it, is that we need to look beyond the borders of the IT unit when it comes to cybersecurity risk. Can I open the floor for questions? You are able to unmute yourself. So anybody that's got a question or a comment, please raise your hands. Is this going to be a very short session? I've got Gavin.
Thanks,
Please
Gavin.
unmute yourself.
Morning, Mr. Pillay. Thank you very much. A very insightful presentation. I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to try to limit them for you, considering you got 15 minutes before you need to depart. I just want to ask if I think in the chat the question was also asked about the 2-day masterclass. If you could just give us some details around that. I think we're all really thirsty for knowledge, and wherever we can get it, we'll take it, I guess, is my statement. I've got 2 more questions, but I'll ask them, you can answer, and I'll ask and you can answer.
Okay. So, Gavin, so I used to teach a honors level course at Wits University. It was 6 months, right? And what I did was I distilled that down into 2 days. And I know it's not possible to distill it down, but I distilled it down into something practical to create this masterclass that covers, and it's non-technical, right? So it covers everything from governance to the emerging legislative framework, to the implications of that. But it has a practical lens that we provide a cybersecurity strategy template document, right? And most organizations have that, and you can bring your own to the class. What we try and do is try and complete that while it's balancing practice and theory. It's just 2 days. It's not, we can't get through everything, but we're not targeting entry-level people, targeting senior managers like yourself, I guess, and just to kind of round off that knowledge. We offer it in conjunction with NIMSA, which is our skills development agency. So you get a certificate of attendance. So you get, it's a formal course within government, so you can actually kind of, get off from work kind of thing. We are trying to mature it into a more intense course, but we'll run that via the National School of Government. So we're trying to embed it within NSG and then become like a 5-day course, and then with all of the kind of accreditation that comes with that. So that's the plan for that.
Thank you. I presume there's costs associated to it, right?
No costs. We just ask for a venue with a projector, and obviously, that's it. We travel on our cost for that.
Amazing. Thank you. Look, that does so much for the community, I'm sure. David, I've already sent you a mail about it in the background. We'll chat about it later. 2 more basic questions. I just want to, you did touch on a lot of them, but just in your personal opinion, just to give you an overview, I coin us as, and I'm not speaking for everybody necessarily, but the majority, we have full-time responsibility for cybersecurity, but we're only part-timers at best. Some are moonlighting, some are hobbyists. But in terms of the officialness of our duties, we are IT managers. There's no CISOs generally in the local government and the districts. So we're all just IT managers who are realizing this is important. So my question is twofold. What is the biggest mistakes you see individuals like us making where we are part-timing? I realize we're going to carry the full responsibility irrespective of our title. And secondly, what would your advice be in terms of the most important things to do, considering the constraint that we're in that is outside of our control? Thank you.
Yeah, so I feel for you, right? So you're part-time until an attack takes place, right? And then it's you. And now, the issues of personal liability come into play as well. So I think it's a difficult question, Gavin. So how do you separate out your roles, right? So I think being able to speak the language in a business language to the executive in terms of issues like service delivery rather than financial costs becomes important, right? I think traditional IT has matured to a point from around 30 years ago, 35 years ago, to where it's become embedded within an organization. We understand that IT is not just some enabler, it's a business imperative. And that's why I think many of you would report directly into the executive, right? Or even sit in the executive. So I think that evolution and how we need to mirror that kind of evolution when it comes to cybersecurity. We need to separate the two out, right? I think traditional IT is this castle and moat structure where we had firewalls around it and we protected what was inside. I think cybersecurity is much more complex. Not is, I don't think it is much more complex. So the traditional understanding of IT and cybersecurity needs to the clear delineation between the two, and understand the imperatives and the approaches to the two are entirely different. I think IT has matured to a point where it's kind of, like I said, embedded. And I think that same evolution needs to happen. How it happens within organizations, in government, I think the AG reports, while very onerous and difficult to adhere to, and the emerging legislation kind of something we can pivot around, right? Legislation and regulation is an important kind of thing that organizations understand, okay? And in the public sector, we understand legislation and regulations. We are often the drafters of that, but we understand the importance of it. So I think if we can take things like the PFMA, MFMA, the kind of things within the Cybercrimes Act and POPIA that are going to come and bite us if we don't adhere to them. So if the information regulator managed to find her own department, right, funding department of Justice, 5 million rand, 5 million rand for negligence and those kinds of things. So I think the regulations can be seen as something that are very onerous, but I also think we can use it as something to pivot around to speak the language to our business, right? That was the first question. Sorry, Gavin, your second question, I was trying to write furiously when you were talking.
So the first question was just about the biggest mistakes we make, and the second was, what would you recommend that we could do in order to improve our situation where our skills and resources are limited, and my whole analogy regarding us being full-time responsible versus only being part-timers at best.
Yeah, so I think I've kind of answered a little bit of the second question. Skills, when we've been at the municipalities, right, and this is anecdotal evidence, there's often people within our organizations that are not entirely utilized, right? And I need to be careful and diplomatic about how I say this, but public servants, I think there's an ability to do more than we generally do. I don't know how to say it, but generally people can take a shortcut when they can, right? And in our sector, I think that I found, I've worked in the private sector, I've worked in academia, but I found that there are people within our organizations that often aren't fully utilized. So I think things like micro-credentialing, other kind of accreditations, and some kind of motivation for people who may have this kind of inherent ability to do more than they're actually doing is maybe one way to approach it. I know it sounds kind of quite mundane and almost facetious, right? But I think we've got to understand our resources and how we can then best utilize it. But issues of micro-credentialing, I think, are really important. So we must look at things like that. Thanks, Kevin. I'm sorry. I'm sure there's better answers out there than me, than the ones I'm giving.
No, it's fine. Look, I've got one more for you. You've created one more follow-up question for me, if you don't mind. Your masterclass. So it dawns on me that sometimes it's difficult to influence from the bottom up, because you're sometimes a little bit close to the
Sure.
sort of the leaders, right? So sometimes they kind of still see us as tech guys, right? Which we try to evolve ourselves out of, but it's hard to self-evolve. Is your masterclass suitable for senior managers, directors? And a second question, is it suitable? I've actually contemplated whether or not is train the trainer, where we could deliver this training to individuals within our municipality or to our leadership. I'm not sure which one works. Maybe they hear us do the training and see or participate in it, and they might see our value a little bit more. What are your thoughts around that?
I think trainer model is really good, and we're happy to do that. But I think if I was going to train my executive, right, this is what I would do, Gavin. I would do a crisis communication simulation. I will say, imagine you've been hit by a ransomware attack, right? A normal desktop exercise, right? Imagine you've been hit by a ransomware attack. I would have the CISO come and brief you on what service delivery issues there are, how long to bring up, what the ransom's being required. And I would then ask that executive committee to role play. And that's what these, not exactly capture the flag and those kind of things, but that's what these cyber drills and crisis communication exercises do. And we've got some of those. So, present a picture to your senior management. So it won't be training per se, right? And you can, you can kind of ingest some training in there. But a crisis communication scenario may be something that what jars them into thinking about the impact of an attack. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I have loads more questions, but I understand you have limited time.
No,
Anybody?
I'll pop my email address and my WhatsApp. I'm happy to chat online as well, Kevin.
Okay. Thank you very much. We've got 5 minutes left. Anybody else with a question or a comment? Okay, thank you very much. We've come to the end of the event. There's a question, Jonathan.
Hi, thank you, David. Thank you, Mr. Pillay, for the very insightful presentation. I think we all have a generic challenge when it comes to obviously ensuring that our cybersecurity controls meet the minimum requirements to obviously as it relates to POPIA, MFA, and AG expectations. So I think there's a struggle that we have to obviously still see that it remains practical and obviously within our municipal budget constraints. But I've heard through the presentation that obviously CETA is doing some work with the SOC that it's being rolled out. National have something. So David, obviously we would want to see, aside from also the training that's provided, that obviously for this year, we would want to obviously utilize those services, because the reality is internally we simply do not have the capacity to perform that function. We are all part-time in that space. And HESECWA, coming out of a recent breach, obviously have learned some valuable lessons as it relates to that. And we really would want to see how we could, between the different spheres of governments and departments, assist one another to obviously improve our security posture. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks,
I'm
Jonathan.
taking that as a comment. Okay. Last statement from my side. Dr. Pillay, the Western Cape government has included cybersecurity as a man-made disaster in their disaster management strategy. So we can expect during the course of the next financial year that there will be some activity around incident response and so on. Jonathan again?
Okay.
So David, is there a response to what you said first? Then I'll ask my question.
Sure. No, it's fine. You can ask, Jonathan.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Jonathan.
So a lot has been said in the past about obviously ICT having to speak the language of business and obviously articulate the needs of business. The training that Mr. Pillay does that speak in any way to that aspect, teaching ICT the soft skills that required to be able to do that? So in a HESECWA context, what we've done, and maybe there's something else that we could potentially consider, our governance structure includes an operational and a strategic steercom. And for where we are, that has actually worked exceptionally well, because we have the technical conversation with the business owners and the critical solutions SLA managers on the operational side of things, where we perform business cases or complete them considering risk, consequence, and obviously financial implications, and then obviously making a recommendation to the senior management on the strategic side, where I am, as the IT manager, obviously just a member. Is there other suggestions of how we can do? But for now, we are comfortable on this side that it's working for us to be able to obviously be that enabler to business.
Yeah. So I think again a lot of what we say, right? So when we present to the board, and again this goes back to something I spoke about last night at the class, right? When we present to the board, then Jonathan, we often speak in terms of heat maps, and we qualify risk, right? So we say it's kind of low, medium, high, right? And those things can often come back to bite us. But I think in terms of maturity, and we build business cases around, well, attack on ransomware attack may cost us this amount of money. But we need to start then maturing to organization to the space that says, well, I need to start quantifying risk, right? And there are models out there that do that. I need to start quantifying loss. So I need to put a value to it. So I need to say my business cases have more kind of due diligence. They have more kind of more due diligence to them, and they become more robust, so that the executive starts understanding more in terms of financial loss and delivery downtime and those kind of things, which we generally kind of fob off as saying, well, it's hard to estimate, or we put an estimate to it, which is often subjective. So I'm saying we need to instill some kind of rigor in our risk processes, in our business cases, in our estimation of loss, our the amount of money we're spending on technology, what we're spending it on. I think it requires more rigor, and that rigor then can be translated to the executive rather than these kind of general kind of briefings that we give to management. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, 100%. Thank you for that. We at the moment we are looking at some of our critical municipal services: water, electricity, billing, SCADA, citizen data systems, and obviously it's important that we cost that and are able to tell business what is the risks that IT brings to these processes, and what is currently tested and untested or missing. And obviously that is where the conversation needs to happen. And IT need to obviously step up to the plate to be contextualize that in a manner that business understands it.
Yeah. And we must also convey how the complexity increases our threat surface and those kinds of things. I mean, we can throw technology at issues, but the complexity can make that kind of complexity in kind of emerging tech also needs to be taken into account, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. We are 1 minute over time, so I'm going to call an end. Dr. Pillay did share his contact details. You're welcome to email him. And Doctor, thank you very much for taking part in this session, for your presentation and answering our questions. I think we are looking forward to that masterclass idea, if I can speak on behalf of those that are on the platform. So you can unmute yourself to greet, and then I will end the event.
Okay, great. Happy to do the masterclass. It'd be great if we can do it in March, because I'm leaving government at the end of March, and be wonderful to visit the winelands again with some real purpose. I'm kidding, but I am leaving government, but I mean, my colleagues will continue with the masterclass going forward, right? So, yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for the invitation, David.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.